Something a wrestler initially pitched to the creative team can be taken and given to a different person entirely.
Hey, you got any great ideas? Yeah, here it is from Scarlet. No. That's a little too great. We're looking just for good ideas. That's for those guys over there.
It might be used for a talent higher up on the card, or someone the company is more interested in pushing.
Heel Brodus in the vignettes that we're running, that was the character. You have an idea, somebody takes it and makes it their own. It's not yours anymore.
We'll have examples of all this and more for this video.
We would have 2 TVs in Gorilla, and they would be watching AEW, and then they would be trying to change the show to compete with what they were doing.
Including cases where wrestlers made a suggestion only to then be fired.
And he hated that idea, and I think he hated me more for suggesting it. The whole idea is to help the company, you fucking idiot.
While their pitch got used weeks or even years later.
A couple weeks later, there's Christian with DDP doing everything I pitched. I'm like, shit. So the next idea I sent in, I go, please hire me as a writer, because you obviously like my ideas because you're using them with other people. And then that was it.
Today, we look at WWE screwing wrestlers out of their own ideas.
That was ripped off big time. It was not fair that they gave my idea to 2 other guys.
Upon leaving WWE in 2019, the former Dean Ambrose, aka Jon Moxley, revealed how many of his ideas would frequently get shot down during his time with the Federation. This was made all the worse by the fact they would sometimes be given to other talent. 2 months after leaving the Federation, Moxley chatted to Wade Keller and mentioned 3 particular spots he pitched that were taken from right under his nose, one of which would have seen him lose via referee stoppage due to blood loss, following some stiff hardway elbows from Brock Lesnar in their match at WrestleMania 32.
I even pitched that he just elbows the shit out of me and busts me open and just does a doctor stoppage. The same thing he did with Randy at SummerSlam.
This exact finish was done later in the year when Lesnar defeated Randy Orton at SummerSlam.
The clubbing forearms, the beast incarnate in a feeding frenzy.
We're seeing the animalistic tendencies of Brock Lesnar.
Moxley also wanted to use a can of mace in his bout with Brock Lesnar. This was initially rejected until Lesnar warmed up to the spot right before the show began. However, by then it was too late to implement into the match.
Start the match, I fucking mace him in the face. Roll out, and now he can't see. So start the match, almost start with a comeback. And I've been pitching this for weeks. Nobody's listening to me. And then like 3:34 or whatever before the show, Brock's like, actually, I really like that. Props makes one with whatever props they have. It's like an Evian water bottle and like food coloring or some shit. So they test it on camera, and it just looks like shit on camera. So we don't do the mace route. But I'm like, if you would have listened to me 2 weeks ago when I pitched this, we could have had a proper mace thing here.
6 months after this, Maryse used mace to help her husband The Miz beat Dolph Ziggler at the Backlash pay-per-view. Moxley previously asked to expose the wooden boards under the ring canvas for his 2014 Hell in a Cell match with Seth Rollins.
Like something simple like tearing the canvas off and exposing the boards. I pitched that for a Hell in a Cell match, and I'm really into it, you know, and I'm explaining it to him. I'm like, yeah, I'm gonna take a fucking box cutter and I'm gonna rip that canvas off and then I expose the wood. And they look at me like I'm fucking stupid. Like they didn't get it at all. It's like, I don't think people are gonna understand it. Yeah, they looked at me like I was an idiot. They're like Hunter's rolling his eyes.
The higher-ups said no, only to then utilize this exact concept. First in The Undertaker and Brock Lesnar's Hell in a Cell clash the next year. And then in Triple H's developmental league NXT, during Tommaso Ciampa and Johnny Gargano's match at TakeOver Chicago 2 in 2018. The spots Moxley suggested were all something WWE rarely did, though it's a safe bet to say they stole them from John, given how soon the company went on to use each one after he first pitched them. Moxley would eventually find his feet in All Elite Wrestling, where he was their top babyface during the Wednesday Night Wars. AEW and NXT went head-to-head for a year and a half, though Triple H always contested that it wasn't a war.
We do, people put so much pressure on all this competitive wars. It never was that. Look, first of all, they beat our developmental system. Good for them. Right.
Look, the promotional opportunity for us is much better on a Tuesday, and also then not having to have a narrative where it's just constantly about an imaginary war.
We've since come to learn that AEW's Dynamite show was closely monitored live by NXT personnel backstage, while both were on the air. Not only that, but the Black and Gold brand would then chop and change the broadcast based on what their rivals were doing. They would even take AEW's ideas, if all is to be believed. Former NXT talent Danny Burch revealed this when speaking to Cafe de Rene.
It was always funny because everyone's like, man, we're going to crush them. You know, because Shawn used to say, oh, well, you're just working guys that we didn't want and blah, blah, blah. We would have 2 TVs in Gorilla and they would be watching AEW and then they would be trying to change the show to compete with what they were doing. I never forget. So like we were scheduled, me and my tag partner, we were scheduled to have a 30-minute main event and I was really excited about it. We had 3 segments. And then because they were watching and they heard that there was like a women's match on first, they cut us to 10 minutes with entrances and said, you guys are going to go on first so we can like steal the opening stuff. Yeah. Wow.
The new wrestling war later saw numerous people go back and forth between each promotion. Aleister Black is one such example, as he found himself unhappy in both organizations at different points. And perhaps it didn't help when he saw someone doing a shtick similar to his on the Rivals show. To set the scene, in August 2022, Karrion Kross returned to WWE with his wife Scarlett by his side. He was one of the first wrestlers Triple H re-signed after taking over creative from the retired Vince McMahon. Kross then received a nice push in his first few months back. While this was happening, Aleister Black was struggling to gain a foothold. As a single star over in AEW, Black was in a decent faction there after previously being on his own in WWE, where he was much more successful in Triple H's NXT than the main roster. Black's wife, Zelina Vega, also came from the Black and Gold brand. However, they'd never been paired together on the show given how different their presentations were. Then by the summer of 2022, Vega was off TV awaiting to be repackaged as a member of the Raw roster. Kross and Black are both dark characters who were seen as Triple H guys given their success in NXT, so when the game took over the reins in the Federation, Black likely saw this as an opportunity to return, especially given the initial success of Karrion and Scarlett, as they were portraying an act Black no doubt wanted to do with his wife Zelina. Roster spots are always limited in wrestling, but even more so when the characters are so similar. Black rarely worked singles matches in AEW, and it was even rarer to see him take a pinfall loss. Online reports suggested he was banking on a return to WWE, hence the decline of his work and lack of losses in All Elite. For a while this was just hearsay, until key people in the AEW locker room spoke up. Darby Allin and MJF noted how much morale backstage improved after the likes of Black and Rusev left the promotion.
I don't have to look anyone in the eye at work and think to myself, this guy doesn't want to be here.
How do you feel like we got to that point?
People had to get weeded out.
Okay. Can I ask, like, who was the biggest offender of this? Who came in there thinking, I'm just going to use you all as a stepping stone to go back to New York?
I think it's pretty obvious that that's Malachi Black. Do I think he's a bad guy? No. Do I think he was a mark for like wanting to have his, oh, I need my mania moment? Like, yeah. And there were a couple guys like that, and they got weeded out. And then they went over there, and some of them found out the grass isn't greener. But I'd say a majority of the guys that were like, I'm just going to use All Elite Wrestling to go to WWE or to go back to WWE. I think you're going to see a lot of those guys ask for a 50% pay cut from the office. Or you're going to see a lot of those guys just get released.
While Black was quote-unquote phoning it in for AEW, fans began campaigning for Karrion Kross to get more opportunities in WWE. However, after months of creative frustration, he and Scarlett departed in August 2025 after failing to agree a new deal. By this point, Black had already returned to WWE 3 months prior after his AEW contract expired. He wouldn't do much of note until October 2025 when he finally aligned with his spouse Zelina on screen. She now donned a dark persona just like her husband. Her last name Vega had also been removed, meaning she now had one name just like Scarlett. Over the next few weeks, fans couldn't help but notice the resemblance between Black and Zelina and Kross and Scarlett. Some fans may argue that Black was already doing his dark persona before Kross, and that two things can be true at once. Either way, the whole situation reminds us what Karrion said during his work shoot promo after failing to make it on the WrestleMania 41 card.
So I decided to be a good soldier. You know what happened? They released me. And then I come back. You know what being a good soldier gets you, everybody here? Just so in case you're wondering, you want the back scoop here. Being a good soldier gets your times cut. Being a good soldier means that people come up to you and say, hey, you got any great ideas? Yeah, here it is from Scarlett. No. That's a little too great. We're looking just for good ideas. That's for those guys over there. That's what being a good soldier is, okay?
Kross later addressed he and Scarlett's similarities with Black and Zelina on the Keeping It 100 podcast.
So when this stuff comes up, we're flattered, bro. Like, we're flattered to still be in the conversations, and you never really know if that's the performers doing that or that is something they're being asked to do. So I can't throw shade.
As of May 2026, Black and Zelina have both been released by WWE once again. Meanwhile, Kross and Scarlett have been working on the independent scene, so we could actually see this potential mirror match take place somewhere down the line. The previous wrestling war culminated in 2001 when WWF acquired WCW. That meant with so much new talent on the books, countless Federation wrestlers were considered obsolete. Chaz Warrington, aka Headbanger MOSH, was one of these odd men out. As such, the company shipped MOSH to Puerto Rico to find his character as Chaz the singles wrestler, as opposed to MOSH of the Headbangers team. After being sent there, he pitched some ideas to the company in an attempt to get back on TV, one of which ended up being used on the show for other performers. MOSH, meanwhile, stayed off television before being fired shortly after. He spoke about this in an interview with Chris Van Vliet.
I saw DDP came in doing his positive speaking thing with his bright, shiny teeth and ends with a smile all the time. And I was like, what he needs is like the little devil guy over here, like doing his dirty work behind him. Like, DDP's the face.
Yeah.
Like, I'm the positive guy. Like, you do this and do it the positive, you do it the right way.
Yeah.
But meanwhile, behind his back, I'm doing all the dirty work. There's this guy doing all the dirt. He's cheating. He's doing this. He's doing it. He's causing shit in the back. But meanwhile, DDP's like, I don't know what's going on.
Yeah.
Like, I'm this positive figure. And a couple weeks later, there's Christian with DDP doing everything I pitched. I'm like, shit. So the next idea I sent in, I go, please hire me as a writer because you obviously like my ideas because you're using them with other people. And then that was it.
This wasn't the first time this happened for MOSH though. In 2000, he was in the mix for Crash Holly's hardcore title, whereby the belt was defended 24 hours a day. With this in mind, MOSH thought of a clever concept that would have seen him win the championship. He explained the scenario during an appearance on Café de Renee.
One of the ideas I had was Crash was sleeping in the back. And I come over with the ref, just put like a finger on him and 1, 2, 3, I grab the belt, run off.
Nice.
They loved the idea so much they had Jerry Briscoe do it.
MOSH wasn't the last wrestler to get fired after pitching an idea though, as in 2008 Paul London was more than fed up working for WWE. Despite the creative handcuffs, he'd enjoyed a decent run with the company but was essentially an enhancement talent come 08. In an attempt to stay employed, Paul asked to work in the company's failing film division as an in-house producer. He'd essentially be a middleman between the wrestling side and Hollywood, similar to that of Chavo Guerrero in modern times. London brought up ways for the studio to grow and progress from the position it was in. At the time, WWE would have their talent star as the lead, but the eventual movie usually tanked if not for DVD sales. Paul believed WWE should use name actors to sell their films to the mainstream. The wrestlers would instead appear in supporting roles so as to still appeal to the WWE fans. Not only did the higher-ups reject this, but they used it against London when they fired him in November 2008. They said his intentions were elsewhere instead of focusing on wrestling. Keep in mind the former Cruiserweight champion was barely being used unless he was jobbing. Paul reflected on it all while appearing on Café de Renee.
Yeah, I think they could sense that I was pretty disillusioned with the place too, because that's when I had pitched, you know, them putting me through film school so that I could be an in-house writer and director for their film studio.
Yeah.
And I had this big pitch to Johnny Ace and presented the idea of, you know, it's like you don't try to make these guys tent poles. You make these guys bit players or cameos. That's what you do with the wrestlers. You sprinkle them in, and you're not worrying about whether you're going to make your money back or not, because you have actual actors and bankable names and draws. And he hated that idea, and I think he hated me more for suggesting it. It was like, and it just seems like, you know, your heart's more with like acting and filmmaking than with us. And, you know, it's like, the whole idea is to help the company, you fucking idiot. Yeah.
WWE eventually moved away from casting their talent in lead roles in favor of more well-known actors. They also decided to co-produce films with other studios. Meanwhile, just as London had pitched years earlier, the wrestlers ended up appearing as background characters instead. This format proved to be more successful, but by that point, WWE's hopes of having its own thriving film division were long gone. Paul ultimately pursued a career in movies away from the company. Brodus Clay was among the wrestlers who had a minor role in one of the later WWE films, that being No One Lives, released in 2013. 2013. However, in mid-2011, Brodus Clay was in creative limbo after being taken off Raw and SmackDown following WrestleMania 27. Previously, he'd been a silent bodyguard for Alberto Del Rio, so in a bid to come back on his own, Brodus presented a monster heel-style character. Here, he would destroy opponents and induct them into the Hall of Pain, as a play on the real WWE Hall of Fame. The higher-ups saw money in Clay's vision, but because he was so far down in the pecking order, he was snubbed in favor of Mark Henry. Henry was one of several monstrous villains already on the roster. That meant there was no room for Brodus. Vignettes began airing hyping Clay's return as a dominant villain, but these plans were scrapped and Brodus failed to re-emerge as a heel. Mark got a big push as the proprietor of the Hall of Pain, which culminated in him winning the first world title of his career in September 2011. As for Clay, he was kept off the main shows for 8 months. He eventually returned as a dancing babyface, but never moved beyond the preliminary match level. Henry, on the other hand, was ultimately inducted into the actual Hall of Fame in 2018. Brodus holds no ill will for being looked over. While speaking to the RCWR show, Clay said that Mark did the Hall of Pain differently and much better than he ever could.
We pitch ideas all the time. And, you know, and he'll Brodus in the vignettes that we're running, that was the character. And we decided to go in another direction with, you know, the Funkasaurus. And then here you have Mark, who's every bit of a super destroyer. And, you know, he's the world's strongest man. And the angry Mark is, you know, a world of pain for anybody. So here's the thing. You have an idea, and it's just an idea. It's just something on a piece of paper. Somebody takes it and makes it their own and makes it something new. It's not yours anymore. So I never felt like he took anything from me because I wouldn't have done it the same way he did.
Around the same time Brodus was struggling to get back on television, fellow lower card wrestler JTG mapped out a story which would have seen him have an imaginary friend who was a puppet. The catch was that only the fans could hear and understand the puppet and not the wrestlers. The powers that be, including Vince himself, were receptive. Given how WWE were well into the PG era by this stage, Jay figured the idea could appeal to a younger audience. However, once it came time to execute, the writers couldn't get JTG's proposal off the ground. Jay described the storyline on the So Catch by Hal 2 YouTube channel.
It was going to be a Muppet, and I was going to do it backstage. It was going to be similar to the show Big Mouth with the hormone monster, where the audience and the character can only see the hormone monster, and the hormone monster's making jokes and being witty and all that good stuff. So I pitched that idea. They loved it. And then after a few weeks, you know, after talking about the idea, and they started getting, like, I think, frustrated with me because I was very passionate. I really wanted to do this. I wanted it to be done right. You know, they just wanted to do a hand puppet. I'm like, no, it can't be a hand puppet. It's got to be like a Jim Henson type of production, you know. Muppet will take on the personality. It could have been a comedian, it could have been one of the boys who were funny, you know, it could have been somebody.
JTG's Muppet angle never materialized, but all was not lost from the writer's perspective. They implemented elements of Jay's pitch for R-Truth and his imaginary friend Little Jimmy. Little Jimmy was initially a pseudonym for the type of fan Truth didn't like anymore once he turned heel. However, Truth was so entertaining, he became a fan favorite again. Meanwhile, Little Jimmy morphed into an invisible friend that accompanied Truth everywhere, and someone he was far protective of. In contrast, JTG struggled for TV time throughout the remainder of his 3 years with the company.
After that, the communication just slowed down and nobody was returning my emails. And then a few months later, I see somebody else with an imaginary friend.
JTG and the imaginary friend was a case where an idea was used for someone higher up on the card. The same can't be said for our next example, whereby a main event act pitched something that got used for mid-carders in an entirely different company. Back in the Attitude Era of the late 90s, Triple H and Shawn Michaels were famous for their wacky comedy skits and segments. One angle they suggested involved a flying Elvises group made up of 3 people, each with a different ethnicity. Hunter and Shawn ran the concept by head writer Vince Russo. He liked it enough to where they all pitched it to Vince McMahon. However, the chairman scoffed at the idea. Russo kept the idea in his back pocket though. He put it into use after joining upstart promotion TNA in 2002, as the Flying Elvises consisted of 3 high-flying cruiserweight wrestlers, each from different backgrounds. Jimmy Yang, who was the Asian member of the stable, explained the group's origins while chatting to Chris Van Vliet.
Triple H, Paul, he stopped me when he was talking and said, "Hey Jimmy, I remember when you did the Elvis thing." I was like, yeah, really cool. You know, it's like, you know who came up with that idea, right? I said, "Nah, I thought that was Vince Russo." I said, "No, it was me."
Triple H?
And Shawn Michaels, we came up with the Flying Elvises. And one day, like, we went to go pitch it to Vince. It was Triple H, Shawn, and Vince Russo to go pitch this idea to the McMahon. Then Hunter said, "Yeah, we pitched it to Vince." And Vince looked at us like, "What drugs are you guys are on?" Then Vince took that idea to TNA in that first pay-per-view. But the Flying Elvis is actually, the idea came from Triple H and Shawn Michaels.
Shawn Michaels is also involved in our final entry, although this time he was the one executing the stolen idea. To paint the picture, Bret Hart saw how well the ladder match worked in Stampede Wrestling throughout the 70s and 80s, therefore he wanted to bring it to WWF in the early 90s. Bret was able to do exactly that by working the company's first ever ladder match in July 92 against Shawn. It wasn't recorded for TV or pay-per-view, since it was basically a demonstration to show Vince McMahon what the stipulation was. It was released on a VHS compilation the following year, and for that reason it went relatively unseen. So when the Federation began promoting Michaels and Razor Ramon's WrestleMania 10 clash as the first ever WWF ladder match, Bret wasn't happy. He wanted to be in the company's first high-profile ladder match, since he was the one who told Vince about the concept. The Hitman begrudged the decision to go with Shawn and Razor instead of him in an interview provided by Title Match Wrestling.
I said, well, there's this crazy match I've been trying to push on you for years, the ladder match. I'm trying to get you to look at it. If you just look at it one time, you can see what the concept is. It was a great match for suspense. And I said, I think I could do that with Shawn if you want. And that's how I could drop the belt to him if you do it in Washington.
Right.
I said, but I think that's the way. It was just ideas. And he goes, I've never seen one. I told him a little bit about the match. I tell you this idea under the promise that you promise me you'll never do it with anyone else. He goes, I promise. So I told him the idea for the ladder match. It's another line that Vince McMahon was part of. So I always felt bad. For me, that was my match. And I let Scott and Shawn talk about it like it was their baby. That was ripped off big time. It was not fair that they gave my idea to two other guys that never appreciated it, never failed to mention it quite often. That it was never their idea, but they ripped it off.
Now, if you enjoyed this video, be sure to check out our first installment of WWE screwing wrestlers out of their ideas. Hope you have a great day, and I'll see you next time.